In the archives of the Aquamarine Sports Complex, there is a recording that is not shown to visitors. It shows a man entering locker room number 7. There is no recording of him leaving. The cameras did not capture it. That moment is simply absent, as if it were cut out of time. Several minutes later, the door is opened manually. The locker room is empty. His clothes are neatly hung inside the locker. A phone is lying on the bench with the screen facing up. The keys are next to it. Bare footprints lead from the entrance to the far wall and stop there as if the person took a step and disappeared. But this is not the most unusual detail. The entire locker room is wet. The floor, the walls, and even the ceiling are covered with a thin layer of water. The shower was not turned on. The system was functioning normally. The water is saline, the kind found only in ocean water, although the sea is many kilometers away. This occurred on an ordinary weekday evening when the pool was almost empty. The man was named David Harrison. He came here regularly for many months in a row, always at the same time, always along the same route. He was the type of person who did not change habits and valued order. That evening he arrived as usual. He parked. He went inside. The cameras record his path without interruption. There is no haste and no sign of concern. Everything looks the same as dozens of times before. He chose locker room number 7, the farthest and the quietest. Several minutes later, he exited toward the pool, but stopped at the edge of the water. On the recording, he is seen looking into the water and freezing in place. His lips move as if he is saying something, but there is no sound. Then he turns abruptly and goes back, quickly, almost at a run. He enters locker room number 7 again, and no one ever sees him after that. The security guard opened the door several minutes after noticing that the man still had not come out. He had worked here for a long time and knew the schedule by memory. The session was coming to an end. The locker rooms usually emptied earlier, but number 7 remained closed. He knocked, identified himself, and waited. There was no response. Inside, there was silence. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Not chlorine and not dampness, but something else, heavy and saline. The smell of the sea. This part of the building had never smelled like that before. The floor was wet, not merely damp, but covered with water. It reflected the light from the lamps, ran down the walls, and gathered into small pools. It looked as if the room had just been doused with water, but there was no source. The guard stopped involuntarily at the entrance before stepping inside. The locker was open. Inside, clothes were hanging neatly. Everything looked as if the person had stepped out for a minute and forgotten to return. A phone lay on the bench. It was wet, but it was working. The screen was still lit. The guard picked it up. A note was open on the screen. Just one word, typed in capital letters. Deeper, nothing else. He put the phone back and did not touch it again. There were footprints on the floor, clear impressions of bare feet. They led from the bench to the far wall, step by step, without haste or disorder, and ended there. The prints did not blur and did not fade gradually. They simply stopped, as if there was nowhere further to go. The guard stepped closer and ran his hand along the wall. It was cold, solid, and wet. No cracks and no openings. Ordinary concrete. He knew this wall. There were no rooms or technical areas behind it, but there were scratches on the surface, thin and shallow, gathered in groups, like marks from fingers. As if someone had been scraping at the wall for a long time, not trying to get out, but on the contrary, trying to go further inward. The guard pulled his hand away. It seemed to him that the water on the wall was warmer than it should have been. He wiped his palm on his uniform and stepped back, keeping his eyes on the corner. Several minutes later, the police were called to the site. When the first officers entered the locker room, the water was still there. It was not drying. The air remained heavy and saturated with salt, and no one had the sense that this was ordinary water from the pipes. The guard did not enter again and stayed by the door. The dogs brought in later behaved strangely. They reached the middle of the locker room and stopped, refusing to go farther. Growling, they stared at the corner by the wall. The guard noticed that none of them crossed the line where the footprints ended. David's phone was taken into custody. The word "deeper" remained the only thing he managed to write. No messages, no calls, no attempt to ask for help. Only that word and the traces that led to the wall. From that evening on, the guard never opened locker room number 7 alone. By morning, it was clear that this was not an ordinary disappearance. Not because no body was found, but because everything that followed refused to fit into any familiar pattern. Every explanation that would normally apply collapsed almost immediately. No one entered the locker room after David. No one left it. The cameras recorded everything without interruption. The space was enclosed, and the man vanished as if he had been carefully removed from the situation, leaving no extra movement and no error. The walls were opened slowly and with caution. Behind them, there was nothing that could explain the disappearance. Ordinary rooms, pipes, concrete. No voids, no hidden passages, nothing through which an adult person could pass, even with effort. The ventilation system was checked separately. It was too narrow and had not been opened for a long time. This possibility was dismissed immediately and without doubt. The dogs picked up David's trail again and again. Each time it led them to the same place and ended there. The animals stopped at the wall, did not come any closer, and refused to move on. The guard who was present during the inspections noticed that each time they stopped at the same distance, as if beyond that point, there was a boundary that could not be crossed. The first truly disturbing statement came from a cleaner. She said that on that evening she heard the sound of water, not from the pool and not from the showers, from the locker room itself. A quiet splashing, as if someone was moving in water, and then a short sound similar to a dive. This occurred at approximately the same time when David returned there. Inspection of the water systems provided no answers but added another question. Water losses were recorded, minor, abrupt, irregular. Water disappeared and then appeared again, as if it was being taken and then returned. No standard model could explain this. There was also another detail that people tried not to say aloud. The guard would later say that it was at that point he stopped doing night rounds alone. The water in the locker room was saline. Not nominally and not slightly, fully saline, of a kind that does not exist in municipal systems. This fact was almost absent from the reports. It did not help the investigation and sounded too implausible. After several days, the story reached the news. Headlines spoke of a mystery and of a sealed room. But within the investigation, it was already understood that the issue was not the room and not the man. The issue was the location. The same corner, the same wall, the same point. And when older documents were reviewed, it became clear that this location had appeared before, long before David Harrison. The older documents were retrieved without enthusiasm. Files that were rarely revisited because they contained no answers. Only recorded facts and blank spaces where information should have been. The trigger was an internal memorandum prepared after the disappearance of David. It was brief and contained no conclusions, but it identified the exact location associated with the highest number of inconsistencies. The first correlation was found quickly. A case closed many years earlier, a different period, different individuals, the same location, the same sports complex, a different name and a different sign. The building layout matched. The same locker room, the same corner, the same wall. The disappearance had occurred almost 40 years earlier. A woman, young. She had come to the pool in the evening and did not leave. The locker room was found empty. At the time, it was classified as a voluntary departure. It was concluded that she had chosen to disappear on her own. The case was closed. However, the file contained details that had not received attention at the time. The smell of water, traces of moisture, complaints from staff about unusual sounds. All of this was treated as coincidence. No one attempted to connect the elements. Witness statements included unusual phrasing. She said that she heard a call, that the water was calling her, that in her sleep she was going deeper to a place where breathing was not required. It did not sound dangerous. It sounded metaphorical, like fatigue, like ordinary words used by a person who loved the sea. The physician she had spoken with shortly before her disappearance wrote cautiously, "No diagnoses, only observations, recurrent dreams, a sensation of attraction, thoughts of returning, not to people, to water." After her disappearance, he made a personal note, informal, not intended for any report. He wrote that the locker room was always damp, even when it was dry, that there was a persistent smell of the ocean, and that at times it seemed to him that someone was moving in water behind the walls. At the time, this entry was classified as personal opinion and excluded from the case materials. It was now reviewed again. When the two cases were compared, it became clear that there were too many similarities. Not in the individuals, in the location, in the sensations, in the details that are usually not recorded. These were the details emphasized by the person who first discovered the empty locker room. The primary match was not the disappearance, it was the wording. Both cases contained the same phrase, spoken by different individuals, at different times, under different circumstances. They said that they heard a call, and that the call came from depth. When it became clear that there were too many correlations, the decision was made to proceed not through documents but through the location itself. The floor in the locker room was opened at the exact corner where the footprints ended. The work was done slowly and with caution, as if there were concern about disturbing something unnecessary. Beneath the tiles, there was first ordinary soil, then damp earth, then sand. Not construction sand and not river sand, sea sand. The guard was present from the beginning and consistently kept some distance, never approaching the open section more than required. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Moisture rose from below, seeped through the ground, and ran down the sides of the excavation. The smell of salt intensified with each level. It was the same smell of ocean water that had been present in the locker room on the night of the disappearance. Heavy, dense, foreign to the location. The guard recognized it immediately and stopped trying to convince himself that it was coincidence. At a certain depth, a wall appeared. It was not concrete and not part of the building foundation. Dark stone, smooth, laid evenly, without mortar and without signs of modern construction. It had no relation to the sports complex and had been there long before a city existed at this site. Beyond the wall, a passage was found, leading downward. It was examined immediately, without formal procedures and without reports. Inside it was dark and damp. The stone was covered with a thin film of salt water. The air felt thick and heavy. Every sound returned as an echo, as if the space itself reacted to the presence of people. The guard remained above at the entrance and did not descend beyond the first step. The passage extended deeper than any plans or drawings allowed. Patterns were visible on the walls, waves, spirals, figures resembling people but distorted. All of them were oriented in the same direction, downward, toward something round and concealed in the depths. None of the patterns led outward. At the end of the passage, a large space opened. At its center was water, a circular basin with an entirely black surface. Light did not reach the bottom no matter how long it was observed. By smell and density, it was clear that this was the same saline water that had coated the locker room walls above, as if the source was here rather than elsewhere. A sound came from the depths, not loud and not sharp, but rhythmic and calm, similar to breathing or distant heartbeat. Those who were present later could not describe the sensation precisely. They said that fear disappeared and was replaced by a sense of recognition, as if the place had been familiar long before they arrived. During the inspection, one individual stepped too close to the edge. He did not shout and did not call for help. He simply stepped forward, as if deciding to test the depth. The water closed over him without a splash. There was no time to stop him. The guard who observed from above would later say that at that moment, the sound of the water changed. After that, the work was halted. The body was not recovered. There were no signs of struggle. The reports later stated that the individual fell due to carelessness and that the depth of the basin exceeded expectations. These formulations were used to close the matter. The passage was sealed within a day. The floor was restored. The locker room was closed permanently. The case materials were placed in the archive with a designation not intended for publication. The guard continued working at the complex, and from that point onward, always remained alone on night shifts. The sports complex reopened several months later. People returned. The pool water became ordinary, fresh and chlorinated. Almost ordinary. Disappearances continued. Sometimes it was a visitor, sometimes an employee, sometimes a person who simply stayed later than usual. Each time the cameras recorded the same sequence. A person entered locker room number 7 and never appeared on the recordings again.